بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه وبعد. We move on then to a discussion of some of the issues that our brothers have advised Muhammad Hijab concerning. Since many of the people are confused and are not clear concerning exactly what the issue is, they hear from Muhammad Hijab, and what is apparently manifest is that he is a caller to Allah and a caller to the deen of Islam. And so what is the problem? What is wrong with these brothers at Salafi publications, and why can't they just leave people alone? And so our brothers advise Muhammad Hijab concerning some quite serious, in fact very serious mukhalafat and oppositions of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, issues related to the aqidah, to the belief, to tawheed, to call to Allah azza wa jal, and other than that from the issues. And so he was advised in regards to specific issues and in regards to generalities and general principles. The reality, ikhwan, is that the one who observes the da'wah and listens to and has any knowledge and observes the da'wah of Muhammad Hijab, then he will conclude that he in actuality is nothing but a pseudo socio-political philosopher than he actually is a da'i. You will learn more about metaphysics, epistemology, liberalism, ontology, social sciences than you will learn about the aqidah and the fiqh and usul al-fiqh and tafsir and hadith. You'll learn more about Aristotle and Immanuel Kant and Bertrand Russell and John Cook and others than you will about Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman and Ali and Imam al-Shafi'i and Ahmad and Malik and others, and the Tabi'een and their successors. Since his da'wah is based and built upon falsafa, upon philosophy, and the branches of philosophy in the garbs of deen, and it is built upon logic in the garbs of fahm and Islamic understanding. The naql, the text, is or follows the aql, and it is used to support the aqlani approach that he has to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this intellectual approach to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that no doubt is based upon the fact that faqidu shay la yu'ti, the one who doesn't possess something is not able to give it. And so his followers are intrigued because, well, of course, he is different, not realizing that they're being poisoned with principles that the Salaf of this ummah used to be free from, used to warn against. They, no doubt, were far better than us and far more intelligent than any one of us, and didn't use these principles, these philosophical, logical principles. But Muhammad Hijab knows that if he enters into the field of da'wah, then he'll be miles and furlongs behind those who have preceded him to da'wah, and of course that wouldn't be good for views. And so, as the scholars have mentioned, general statement that they mention, khalif tu'raf, that if you oppose what is conventional, then you will be known. So if we throw in a verse here, a hadith there, then of course our call would appear to be congruent with real da'wah, and so we end up with da'wah with a twist. In actuality, what we actually have is nothing but twisted da'wah. But due to widespread ignorance, ikhwan, unfortunately, and particularly in this time, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. But Ahl Sunnah are not blind, alhamdulillah. Neither are they a'war, neither are they one-eyed. Their vision is 20/20, and so they recognize that his da'wah has issues early, and they tried to advise him, but to no avail. In fact, they found themselves subject to a smear campaign that was clearly, apparently out of character of this well-mannered Muhammad Hijab. But we saw his reality. We saw his reality. A campaign that we haven't seen him wage against the Ahmadiyya that he debates and the Shia that he debates, or against the atheists or the Khawarij or any of these individuals that he stands against. Rather, all we see from him is adoration and honor and respect and what have you, regardless of what it is they say, and regardless of how they speak about Allah Azza wa Jal, or about the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal, or about Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, or about the companions Ridwanullahi alayhim, or about the Sunnah of the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Regardless, honor and respect. But when one is advised, and when the people of Sunnah give him advice, then we see nothing but blatant disrespect, and in fact just outright lies and fabrications against them. So what is the issue then? And what are the issues that these brothers have raised? We'll begin, of course, with the issue of his da'wah and his call, the call that he claims to be a call to Allah Azza wa Jal, which is nothing but a call to falsafa and a call to recognizing that there is an existence that he refers to as the creator of the heavens and the earth. But this recognition does not lead to understanding and believing in Allah Azza wa Jal. Neither was it the call of the prophets and the messengers. In fact, using these principles, these philosophical principles, was the way of the people of innovation of the past. And it was something that the earlier scholars, they warned against. This was the way of hawa. When we have many of those early narrations from the Salaf of this ummah about hawa and following desires, it was this very affair that they were speaking about. Because this and these principles, they have led to many deviations and the formulation of many deviant groups within Islam. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, we mentioned some of the statements of the A'imma in relation to this. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, he said concerning them, and in those people who use these principles, هم مختلفون في الكتاب مخالفون للكتاب متفقون على مخالفة الكتاب يتكلمون بالمتشابه من الكلام ويلبسون على جهال الناس بما يتكلمون به من المتشابه. He mentions that they are in opposition to the book. Yani they differ with the book. They are in opposition to the book. And they are united upon opposing the book. They speak with ambiguous speech, and they deceive the ignorant people in relation to what they speak of by way of ambiguity. Similarly, we have the statement of Al-Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah ta'ala, who Al-Imam Al-Harawi mentions in Dhamm Al-Kalam. He mentions a statement of his, and that is that he said to an individual known as Nuh al-Jami', he said, ما تقول فيما أحدث الناس, and this is a question that was posed to Imam Abu Hanifa. ما تقول فيما أحدث الناس من الكلام في الأعراض والأجسام؟ فقال مقالات الفلاسفة، عليك بالأثر وطريقة السلف، وإياك وكل محدثة فإنها بدعة. And this is a beautiful statement for those who are Hanafi but speak ill of the path of Salafiyya. Listen to the statement of Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah ta'ala. Imam Abu Hanifa, he mentions, when he was questioned, what do you say about those who speak using the speech, yani the kalam of the falasifa, or the rhetorical, yani theological rhetoric? What do you say about the one who uses a'rad and ajsam? A'rad and ajsam are two terms that we'll come to, but they are terms that are used by those who use this philosophical rhetoric. Yani a'rad are things that exist within an entity. Yani characteristics, for example, attributes, for example, and things that exist within within an entity. And we'll discuss it later. And ajsam, which are bodies. What do you say about people who use this? This is what from the language of the philosophers. He mentioned maqalat al-falasifa. This is nothing but the statements of the philosophers. He said, alayka bil-athar, cling to the narrations, wa tariqat al-salaf, and cling to the path and the way of the salaf. Yani the Salaf here referring, of course, to the first 3 generations. He said, وَإِيَّاكَ وَكُلُّ مُحْدَثَةٍ. He said, and be aware of everything that is newly invented. فَإِنَّهَا بِدْعَةٌ. For indeed it is bid'ah. In fact, Imam Abu Hanifa, he cursed one of the leaders of this rhetoric, one of the leaders from among the Mu'tazila. He said, لَعَنَ اللَّهُ عَمْرِ ibn Ubayd. He said, may Allah curse Amr ibn Ubayd. فإنه فتح للناس الطريق إلى الكلام فيما لا يعنيهم من الكلام. He said, may Allah curse Amr ibn Ubayd. For indeed he opened up to the people a path to this rhetorical, to this rhetoric that does not concern them. This rhetoric that does not concern them. Likewise, we have the statement of the Imam of Darul Hijra, Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala. Imam Malik mentions, لَعَنَ اللَّهُ عَمْرًا. He too cursing Amr, Amr ibn Ubayd. He said, may Allah curse Amr. فَإِنَّهُ ابْتَدَعَ هَذَا أو هذه. He said, may Allah curse Amr, for indeed he innovated this bid'ah. He said, فإنه ابتدع هذه البدعة من الكلام ولو كان الكلام علما لتكلم فيه الصحابة والتابعون كما تكلموا في الأحكام والشرائع ولكنه باطل يدل على باطل. افهموا إخوان. Understand these statements. He mentioned rahimahullah ta'ala, may Allah curse Amr ibn Ubayd. For indeed he innovated this innovation of speech, of rhetoric, of the usage of this philosophical rhetoric. He said, if this rhetoric was, and when they use the term kalam here, it doesn't refer to speech, linguistically, but it refers to philosophical rhetoric. He said, if kalam was ilm, if kalam was knowledge, if this philosophical rhetoric was knowledge, لَتَكَلَّمَ فِيهِ الصَّحَابَةِ وَالتَّابِعُونَ. Then the Sahaba and the Tabi'un would have used it as they spoke concerning the rulings of the Sharia and the legislation. He said, وَلَكِنَّهُ بَاطِل يَدُلُّ عَلَى بَاطِل. He said, but indeed it is batil, it is falsehood, and it indicates nothing but falsehood. Concerning this statement, Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah, he makes a beautiful comment. He mentions rahimahullah ta'ala, وهذا صريح في رد الكلام والتوحيد الذي كانت تقوله المعتزلة والجهمية وليس له أصل عن الصحابة والتابعين بخلاف ما روي من الآثار الصحيحة في الصفات والتوحيد عن الصحابة والتابعين فإن ذلك لم ينكروه وإنما أنكروا الكلام والتوحيد المبتدع في أسماء الله وصفاته وكلامه. He mentioned that this is clear and manifest as a refutation against kalam, against his philosophical rhetoric, and the tawheed that the Mu'tazila and the Jahmiyyah, these two groups that we'll look at again as we go along, the tawheed that the Mu'tazila and the Jahmiyyah used to use, and that there is no origin for this among the companions and their successors, in opposition to that which has come to us by way of the authentic narrations in relation to the names and the attributes, and tawheed in relation to the attributes, and in relation to tawheed from the companions and the tabi'een, for indeed this was not repelled by them. Rather, they repelled and they rebutted the usage of philosophical rhetoric and this innovated tawheed concerning the names of Allah Azza wa Jal, His attributes and His speech. Similarly, we have the statement of Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, who mentioned حكمي في أهل الكلام أن يضربوا بالجريد والنعال ويطاف بهم في القبائل والعشائر ويقال هذا جزاء من ترك الكتاب والسنة وأقبل على الكلام. Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, who was abqari, he was a genius, an intellectual genius. But what was his opinion about the usage of rhetoric and this philosophical kalam? He said, my verdict concerning the people of kalam is that they should be beaten with wood, with jareed, which is pieces of date palm, branch or bark, and with slippers. And they should be circled among the qaba'il wal asha'ir, among the varying tribes and the varying peoples, and it should be said to them, this is the recompense of the one who leaves the book and the sunnah and turns towards kalam. And that is a statement of Imam Al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala concerning the usage of rhetoric. Naturally, him saying that is my verdict doesn't necessitate that is going to be carried out. That is something that returned back to the ruler at his time if he decided to do so. But his point was, he intended to highlight the position that he held in relation to using this philosophical rhetoric, even though he was a master when it came to language, when it came to the varying sciences that require a level of intelligence, and he was without doubt the first author in the intricate science of usul al-fiqh. Yet still Imam Al-Shafi'i, in his book Al-Risala, you will not find any of the usage of this philosophical rhetoric. Similarly, we have a statement from Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, who said, لا يفلح صاحب كلام أبدا ولا يرى أحد نظر في الكلام إلا في قلبه دغل. He said that indeed, and this is the statement, Ikhwan, of Imam Ahmad, and this is important since Mr. Hijab decides to refer to himself or chooses to refer to himself as Hanbali. And it should be known, Ikhwan, that this is something that is relatively deceptive from Mr. Hijab. What is it that you intend by Hanbali? Because the term Hanbali was something that was used in the earlier period to refer to someone who was Salafi. And so does he mean Hanbali in Aqidah, or does he mean Hanbali in fiqh and in relation to the rulings? Because that does not indicate your Aqidah if that is what you intend. Similarly, the term Athari, which is what he chooses to refer to himself as, then what does he intend by him being Athari? Because the term Athariya and the term Athari is a reference to Salafiyya. And being Salafi, the Athari is Salafi. But do you mean Athari in that you're Salafi in Aqidah and in methodology? Or do you mean Athari, that you like to return back and that you have as your evidence athar or narrations? So that needs to be clarified. Are we speaking about Aqidah, or is he using some type of philosophical usage of speech that would indicate and imply one thing and not the other? In any case, Al-Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, he said that a person who uses kalam, a person who uses speech, will never ever be successful. He said, and you will never see anyone that looks into this affair of kalam, this affair of rhetoric, except that in his heart there is daghal, there is corruption in the qalb, there is corruption in the heart. Similarly, Imam Ahmad, he said, ulama al-kalam zanadiqa. He said the ulama, or the people, the scholars of kalam, that they are zanadiqa, that they are heretics. And these statements, ikhwan, subhanallah, have come from the greatest of the a'imma, ayyuha al-ikhwa. We have likewise the statement of Imam al-Baghawi rahimahullah ta'ala. Imam al-Baghawi rahimahullah, he mentioned, ittafaqa ulama is-salaf min ahli sunnati ala nahi anil jidal. He said that there is unity among the ulama of the salaf from Ahlus Sunnah that it is prohibited that one enters into argumentation. وَالْخُصُومَاتِ فِي الصِّفَاتِ. And that one, debates concerning the sifat of Allah Azza wa Jal, concerning the attributes of Allah, because debating was not their way. Their way was that since the affairs are united, there is a unanimous consensus among the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, that which they believe in, there was no differing among them. And since if they have ijma and unity upon the affairs of aqeedah and the affairs of belief, if there is unity, then who then will dare and be bold enough to come along after them? After the Sahaba have united, after the Tabi'een have united, who is bold enough to come along after them and claim, well, I'm going to have a second position? And so they would not argue about the affairs of Aqeedah, they would merely present them. This is the belief of Ahlul Sunnah. And what you're saying is in opposition to their belief. Simple. So he mentions, they wouldn't argue concerning the Sifat. وعلى الزجر عن الخوض في علم الكلام وتعلمه. And they would warn staunchly. Here he didn't say naha or naho. He said وعلى الزجر. Zajar is far stronger than a prohibition. It is a staunch prohibition. He said that they made zajar against entering into kalam and ta'allumihi, and learning it. So that is whether entering into it, speaking about it, or learning it even. And it's not something that we just say, well, I'm just going to acquaint myself with it and learn it just so I can know about it. Rather, they would fear for the one who studied and learnt kalam, because it is a area and it is a bab and it is a door to misguidance. And so, one does not open up and subject his heart to that which may possibly misguide him. And so we need to understand, ikhwan, that the philosopher, whether we're dealing with the earliest of the philosophers, the likes of Aristotle, or those who were influenced by the early non-Muslim philosophers from among the Muslimin, the likes of Al-Farabi, or those who at least attribute themselves to the Ummah, though many of them, the scholars of the Sunnah, have made takfir of them and declared them non-Muslim. But in any case, those who attribute themselves to the Ummah, the likes of Al-Farabi, the likes of Ibn Sina, the likes of Al-Razi, and others among those who utilize this rhetoric, then what is it, Ikhwana? What is the basis of their argument? The basis of their argument generally revolves around that which is related to existence. And they argue that if we're speaking about existence, then we must know that existence is of types. And this is how they debate and how they establish that Allah Azza wa Jal exists, they claim. And it does not establish the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we'll see how. So they say that existence is of types. We have that which is known as mumkin al-wujud. That is, we have that which is known as possible existence. And what is intended by possible existence is something that may possibly come about. It may exist, it may not exist. We, for example, are possible existences. That we may exist or we may not exist. It is possible that one of us is born and he grows, he becomes a man, and he is known, mathalan, as Ahmad. That Ahmad may not actually have existed, but because of the conditions and because of the presence of those things that were means to him being conceived, then Allah Azza wa Jal decreed that he was conceived. And so his existence is possible. Similarly, if we look at the animals, if we look at everything that is around us, then those things, the existence of those things is possible. It doesn't necessitate that those things come into existence, but they're possible existences. And so things are either possible existences, that is, they may possibly come into existence, they may not. And we have what is known as mumtani al-wujud. The mumtani al-wujud is that thing that is impossible. And so the impossible existence is that which is based upon two opposites, for example, a tall, short man, or something that is based upon two complete opposites that couldn't exist. And so there is the impossible existence. And then we have that which is referred to as wajib al-wujud. Wajib al-wujud is that thing that is a necessary existence. And that necessary existence must exist in order to bring the possible existence into being. And how do they argue concerning that? Well, they say that if you look at the possible existence, as we've said, may or may not come into being. But if we were to say that it was a possible existence that brought this possible existence into being, then naturally the first question that we're going to ask is, what brought that possible existence into being? And if we were to suggest that another possible existence brought that possible existence into being, then again we're going to ask, well, what brought that other possible existence into being? And we continue in that manner infinitely. And this is something that is referred to by them as an infinite regress. Tasalsul. It is an infinite regress, and this infinite regress is logically not possible, not viable. And so it must be said that there must have been one entity that brought all of these possible existences into being. That one entity is the necessary existence. The necessary existence is that thing that possesses certain characteristics. If it does not have these characteristics, then it cannot be referred to as a necessary existence. From those characteristics, for example, they say it cannot be dependent upon anything. And so it cannot have iftiqar. And it cannot have dependence upon anything. If it is dependent upon something, then it would necessitate that its dependence is an indication of its weakness and of the fact that it is not a necessary existence but a possible existence. And if it is dependent upon something, then it is dependent upon something external to itself. Therefore, it cannot be a necessary existence, they argue. Similarly, they say that it cannot be murakkab, that is, it cannot have and be upon tarkib. It cannot be constructed, or it cannot be a composite. It cannot be something that is brought about and constructed, since that would render it possible and not necessary. And so it cannot be constructed. And what they, of course, mean by that, and they go on to argue, is that it cannot have tajzi'ah. That is to say, it cannot be of parts. It cannot have inqisam. It cannot be divided into parts. Or have kathura, numerousness. And so there are 2, 3 or more parts to this entity. Because if it has parts, then it will be dependent upon those parts. As we, for example, are made of parts. We have skin, we have bones, we have a nervous system, we have organs. All of these things, they are dependent upon. And even if you were to look at a cellular level, you have the cell, you have the cell membrane, you have mitochondria, you have the nucleus, you have all of those parts that make up the cell. And so it would have to be argued that anything that is dependent upon parts, or anything that is constructed of parts, is dependent upon those parts. Therefore, it cannot be constructed from parts. It cannot have a'rad, and this is going back to this issue that we mentioned earlier. It cannot have a'rad, it cannot have hawadith, or things that occur within it, because that would then necessitate that it is from the possible forms of existence. And that would be like unto a possible form of existence. It cannot have a hayyiz, mathalan. That is, it cannot occupy space. Neither can it have a makan. neither can it have a place that it exists, neither can it have a jiha. And this is part of and one of the manners in which the philosophers, particularly those who have attributed themselves to this ummah, this is how they develop the argument. It cannot have a jiha, it cannot be in a direction. And so these arguments or these parameters that they mention are all issues that are related and connected to the wajib al-wujud. The wajib al-wujud cannot have any of these things. And so they develop the argument in this manner. And so they establish that the creation must have, since the creation is filled with that which is mumkin al-wujud, it must have a wajib al-wujud. And the wajib al-wujud, they say, is the creator of the heavens and the earth. And this is how they debate with individuals in establishing the presence of God, or in establishing the presence of Allah. And this method of debate, ikhwan, what many of those who utilize it don't realize is that it has led to some of the greatest of the deviant sects formulating and establishing themselves in the earlier part of Islam. And up until this very day they exist. It has led to the development and the establishment of the Jahmiyyah. It led to the establishment of their children, the Mu'tazila, and it led to the establishment of their children, the Kullabiyya and the Asha'ira, the Ash'ari creed and sect. What was it that the Jahmi, they used to argue? And what did the Jahmi say? The Jahmiyyah, they used to argue, and they would, in relation to these characteristics that have been mentioned here, they would negate from Allah Azza wa Jal, since they held that if Allah Azza wa Jal is the wajib al-wujud, then we must negate from Allah a number of things. Yani these things that we have mentioned previously must be negated from Allah Azza wa Jal. And so when they approached the names of Allah Azza wa Jal and the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and when they looked at the af'al and the actions of Allah Azza wa Jal, they said, A'udhu billah. We could never attribute this to Allah Azza wa Jal because it would necessitate one of these things that must be negated from Allah Azza wa Jal. Composition, that it necessitates ajsam, that he cannot be a body, that it necessitates that he is immaterial, incorporeal, and that he cannot occupy space. Yani, all of these statements, when they negated ajsam, that he cannot be a body, yani, then it followed that he can therefore not occupy space, cannot occupy a place. And so this negation of it being a jism, yani, that is, it cannot be immaterial, it must be immaterial, incorporeal, then that has again lawazim, it has things that we must necessarily say. And so the Jahmiyyah, they came along when they saw the names and the attributes of Allah Azza wa Jal. They said that we must negate from Allah all of his names and all of his attributes. And in essence, though they were the worst in what they negated, they were the most stable in their method of arguing. And their arguments were most congruent with the logic that they based their arguments upon. And so they negated from Allah his names, and they entered into saying that these are nothing but words that are yani majazi, and they're just metaphorical words, and they negated from Allah Azza wa Jal that he has names and that he has attributes. And of course, this is batil, and for that reason, the Salaf of this ummah, the great ulama of the Salaf, they made takfir of the Jahmiyyah. Whoever negates these things from Allah Azza wa Jal is a kafir. Likewise, off the back of this group, we had the development of another group, the Mu'tazila. The Mu'tazila's approach was that they said, because they saw the attitude of the ummah towards the Jahmiyyah, but they agreed with the argument and the method of arguing, and so they said The Jahmiyyah, they said they will affirm the names of Allah Azza wa Jal, but those names are just titles. And just as we would have an individual whose name might be Matthew, Mark, Richards. These are just titles. And so they affirmed the names, but they negated the sifat of Allah. They negated the attributes of Allah Azza wa Jal. And so they said that Allah Azza wa Jal, that He doesn't hear, He doesn't see, He doesn't have a face, He doesn't have hands, He doesn't descend, He didn't rise above the throne. They negated all of these things from Allah Azza wa Jal. Then a third group came along, the Kullabiyya, and those who were influenced by them, the Asha'ira, the Ash'aris and the Maturidiyya, and they affirmed the names of Allah, but they said that as far as the attributes are concerned, then we're only going to affirm some of the attributes. And that is that they said they'll affirm those attributes that were necessary to the Wajib al-Wujud. Those attributes that were necessary to the Wajib al-Wujud. What is commonly known is that they affirm 7, some of them affirm 10, some 13, but the attributes that they affirmed were those attributes that they said were necessary to the Wajib al-Wujud. So they affirm life, they affirm knowledge, they affirmed ability, attributes that they said the necessary existence must have, and they negated everything else, or they interpreted everything else away. And so on the back of, and on the basis of this philosophical rhetoric, we had innovation after innovation after innovation after innovation. And it was on the basis of this that we saw the great A'imma, they authored their many books refuting them. Al-Imam Ad-Darimi, he authored his 2 very, very popular books and hugely beneficial, Radd al-Jahmiyyah and Radd al-Bishr al-Marrisi. Likewise, Imam Ahmad, he authored his Radd al-Jahmiyyah, the refutation of the Jahmiyyah. And then we had the later A'imma, many of the A'imma of that era, and the later A'imma, Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah, he authored a number of books refuting this philosophical rhetoric. Likewise, Al-Imam Ibn al-Qayyim, he authored his Sawa'iq al-Mursala ala al-Jahmiyyah wal-Mu'attila. Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah, he wrote a refutation against the Jahmiyyah and against the Falasifa generally, and he wrote many books. Naqd al-Mantiq, he wrote his Radd ala al-Mantiqiyyin. He wrote and authored Dar Ta'arad al-Aql wal-Naql, a refutation of Ibn Sina, one of the philosophers, well-known philosophers who had attributed himself to this ummah, and he made takfir of him, declared him a kafir. He wrote many authorships, as did the A'imma of those periods, up until this very day. That our ulama continue to speak against this falsehood and this batil, because it does not lead to belief in Allah. And it was not the call of the prophets and the messengers. It does nothing but establish what they claim to be a wajib al-wujud. And that wajib al-wujud, this argument was used by the atheist to establish their belief. It was used by the Christian to establish the belief that they have. It has been used by many groups to establish the deity that they claim to believe in, or the falsehood that they call the absence of a deity in actuality. Because what occurred off the back of utilizing these principles and using this argument is that ultimately these individuals denied Allah, and they said that there is nothing above the throne. Because off the back of this argument, they began to say that we cannot affirm, for example, that Allah Azza wa Jal descends in the last third of the night, as the Prophet ﷺ, because we have to negate haraka, we have to negate movement from the wajib al-wujud. Otherwise he will not be wajib al-wujud, because he will have a'rad, he will have hawadith and things that occur with him, and that only occurs with the mumkin al-wujud, with those possible existences. And so we have to negate movement from the wajib al-wujud. Well, that necessitates negation of Allah descending, negation of Allah Azza wa Jal ascending. And in fact, they went on to say that the wajib al-wujud, he by necessity must not be limited by time and space. And therefore the belief that Allah Azza wa Jal is everywhere was held by a group of them. That Allah Azza wa Jal is everywhere, since he's not limited by any time or any space. Imam al-Darimi, when he wrote his book, he wrote a chapter concerning al-had, the limit. That is, he wrote a chapter concerning the boundary or limit that Allah Azza wa Jal is above. Allah Azza wa Jal, the belief of Ahlul Sunnah, is that Allah Azza wa Jal is above his creation, and he is separated from his creation by way of the arsh, by way of the throne of Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah is not with his creation here. And in fact, Imam Ibn al-Qayyim and likewise Imam al-Dhahabi have mentioned that there are over 1,000 evidences, over 1,000, that indicate that Allah Azza wa Jal is above his creation. Over 1,000. Yet these people, they said, based upon this philosophical rhetoric, know that Allah Azza wa Jal is actually here with us, that Allah is within the creation. And so we're starting this session by looking at some of, or one or two of the statements of Muhammad Hijab in relation to this philosophical rhetoric. And we'll just establish in this session, and we're going to go on to look at some of his statements in more detail in the next, just establish the fact that his da'wah and his arguments are the da'wah and the arguments of the falasifa, of the philosophers. And we'll listen to one or two of his statements that have occurred within his debates in Hyde Park.
Julia. It's not that's what he's relying on. He said that we can't have a squared circle, so he's doing everything by definition. This is not what I call it. This is what Leibniz called it. It's what Gödel calls it. It's what Avicenna calls it. It's what Farabi calls it. Everybody says it. Calls it necessary existence. So it's not, I'm not calling it anything. I'm just bringing it back to the literature.
So when he argues here in a debate that he has with a physicist, in a debate that he has with an atheist, he said, these are not my arguments. These are the arguments of Leibniz, the arguments of Gödel, the arguments of Ibn Sina. He presents the arguments of Farabi, as we mentioned, from those philosophers who attribute themselves to the Ummah, who from Ahl al-Ilm are those who have been made takfir, or those who make takfir upon some of them. And thus the statements then, his arguments, he accepts and will freely mention that these are not my arguments, but they are the arguments of the Jahmiyyah, from the arguments of the falasifa, the well-known philosophers. Similarly, in a session where he answers a question around evil and the presence of evil, when he argues concerning the issue, what is his evidence for his response, and what is his evidence against that premise and against the statement that was made and posed to him?
So what do you mean imperfect? And what is your definition of perfection? Is it aesthetic value judgment that you're employing? Or what are you employing exactly? Once again, are you going back to this idea that your judgment or your opinion of what evilness is the opinion? That again is philosophically unsound as an opinion to have.
So we hear, what is it? What do you mean by evil? Yani, just aesthetically evil? What is it exactly that you're saying? And this is the opinion. You think your opinion is the only opinion that is correct? This is philosophically unsound. This is philosophically unsound. And so clearly we see that the usage of philosophy and returning back constantly to philosophical arguments, or the fact that this is not something that tallies with philosophy, is something that we see coming from Muhammad Hijab. In fact, in one of his debates, someone asks a very, very important question. And that is, he asks, how do we know that something is true? Listen to the response of Muhammad Hijab.
So you're not a Christian, right? So the Christian comes up to you here, holds up the Bible, says this is the absolute truth, right? Do you accept that? No.
Why is it not true?
Yeah, but the Bible.
Right.
So
Why is it not
I
true?
would go about trying to show...
Why is anything not true?
Why is anything not true?
Yeah.
So, okay, that's a good question, right? For me personally...
So why is anything not true? That's a good question. Here we go.
I would say from the epistemological perspective, there are many ways of finding out the truth. One of them is intuitionism. So axiomatic reality is that we are, for example, that I exist, right? So that's something that I can't really prove from a logical perspective, but I can from an axiomatic perspective, for self-evident, to say that I exist. So intuition...
So from an epistemological, metaphysical, axiomatical perspective, I exist. كل كلام فاضي. This statement and these statements, ikhwan, were not the method of the argument of the people of Sunnah and Hadith and of the prophets and the messengers, ikhwan. You imagine that Musa alayhi salatu wasalam was asked this question and he responded in this manner, or that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was asked this question, would he respond in this manner? Or Isa alayhi salatu wasalam was asked this question, imagine him responding in this manner. You imagine.
Also argued that we have to make this assumption because it is madness if we don't.
So yeah, intuitionism is one way. I would say another one is...
So what you're saying is you're going to determine what is the truth. It's not because somebody says it's the truth. You have to find out whether it is true.
Well, let me finish my ways. Okay. So I said that you can either do it you can either intuit it. So in other words, it can be something intuitive like the existence of man. It can either be something which is logically reasoned, like for example from first principles. And I would put underneath that or next to it mathematical truths.
Okay.
Right? So I would say mathematical truths are also something which can be proven if you put things together.
One way or another, regardless of the categories, you're finding there are ways to find out what is true. Right.
And I would argue that you can do that.
The important point there is that you don't call it truth if you can't show that it's true.
Absolutely.
Would it be dishonest to claim something as a truth?
Yes.
It's not.
Yes.
Right. So that's why I draw the line. I may believe something very strongly, but I won't say it's the truth unless I can show that it's true.
Right.
Because I think it's dishonest to do it.
I'll be honest with you, Aaron. I believe that our conception, because I know that you might... Sorry, I apologize. Can I stand there? All right, sorry, I apologize. I understand that you might...
and I'm going to have to go quick. But...
Yeah, I will make this very quick. So I understand, Aaron, that you might have encountered a lot of Christian fundamentalists and things like that. I want to say from an Islamic perspective, our conception of God, Allah, that you got in your shirt, right, is completely different from that of the Christian God, right? In that it's not triune, it's not Jesus being, God or the Son of God or something. So what I would say is that, bearing that in mind, and bearing in mind that our understanding of God is an incorporeal, immaterial, one necessary being.
Incorporeal, immaterial, one necessary being. That is, that he doesn't have jism, and that he negates from Allah Azza wa Jal the utilization of these terms. Just to make it clear, we are not saying that Allah Azza wa Jal has a jism. We're not saying this, but what we're looking at are the lawazim of using this speech. Yani what using this speech necessitates. And we'll look at that in more detail in the next session, inshallah. But in any case...
You got in your shirt, right? It's completely different from that of the Christian God, right? In that it's not triune, it's not Jesus being, God or the Son of God or something. So what I would say is that, bearing that in mind, and bearing in mind that our understanding of God is an incorporeal, immaterial, one necessary being, it's independent. I would say that that can be proved from first principles, Aaron. And I can prove that to you right now.
And you'll find, Ikhwan, that even with some of the kuffar and some of the non-Muslims who he addresses and who he speaks to, those who get frustrated with the utilization of these terms that most of them don't understand.
That is a fair point. But that is called the fallacy of incredulity. You say something is so amazing, it's jargon, man. I'll tell you. Incredulity.
I'll give you that statement again.
The fallacy of incredulity. You say something is so amazing, it's jargon, man. I'll tell you. Go and explain it.
So he says, yes, this is an interesting thing that you've presented here, and it's called the fallacy of incredulity. So the person who's supposed to be receiving dawah said, that's just jargon, man. And what are you saying to me exactly? And that was never, Ikhwan, the call of the prophets and the messengers. Their call was crystal clear. They understood what was being said in no uncertain terms, and there was no need, or there was no lebs, and there was no ambiguity, and there was no usage of terms that most of them didn't understand. This was not the da'wah of the prophets and the messengers. It doesn't establish tawheed, neither does it overpower the opponent. And in that regard, we have this beautiful statement, and we'll round up with this beautiful statement of Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah for this session. Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah, he mentions, in relation to those who use these terms, the usage of a'rad and ajsam and immaterial and incorporeal and what have you, he said, فَقَالَ لَهُمْ أَهْلُ السُّنَّةِ أهل السنة say to them, أحدثتم بدعا تزعمون أنكم تنصرون بها الإسلام. He said, the Ahl Sunnah say to them, you have brought about innovations, claiming that by way of these innovations you are aiding Islam. He said, فَلَا الْإِسْلَامِ نَصَرْتُمْ وَلَا لِلْعَدُوِّ كَسَرْتُمْ. He said, you have neither, this is the statement of Ahl Sunnah to them, you have neither aided Islam, nor have you overpowered the enemy. He said, بَلْ صَلَتْتُمْ عَلَيْكُمْ أَهْلُ الشَّرْعِ وَالْعَقْلِ. Rather, you have made, or you have caused yourselves to be overpowered by the people of Sharia and by the people of intellect. And both the people of Deen and the people of intellect have overpowered you. And we're going to see in the further sessions examples of how the people of intellect have overpowered Muhammad Hijab using this rhetoric. He mentioned, rather you have caused yourselves to be overpowered by the people of Sharia and by the people of intellect. He said, فَالْعَالِمُونَ بِنُصُوصِ الْمُرْسَلِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ أَنَّكُمْ خَالَفْتُمُوهَا وَأَنَّكُمْ أَهْلُ الْبِدْعَةِ وَالضَّلَالَةِ. He said that those who have knowledge concerning the text that was sent by the Mursaleen, by the prophets and the messengers, then they know that you have opposed them. You have opposed those texts. And that you are people using innovation or upon innovation and misguidance. He said, وَالْعَالِمُونَ بِالْمَعَانِيَ الْمَعْقُولَةِ يَعْلَمُونَ أَنَّكُمْ قُلْتُمْ مَا يُخَالِفُ الْمَعْقُولِ. And those who have knowledge concerning the intellectual meanings, then they know that you have opposed what is indicated intellectually. وَأَنَّكُمْ أَهْلُ خَطَأٍ وَجَهَالَةٍ. And that you are people of error and a people of ignorance. He said, وَالْفَلَاسِفَةَ الَّذِينَ زَعَمْتُمْ أَنَّكُمْ تَحْتَجُّونَ عَلَيْهِمْ بِهَذِهِ الطَّرِيقِ تَسَلَّتُوا عَلَيْكُمْ بِهَا. He said, and the philosophers who you claim you're using their philosophy against them, then they have overpowered you with it. He said, وَرَأَوْا أَنَّكُمْ خَالَفْتُمْ صَرِيحَ الْعَقْلِ. And they see that you have opposed what is apparent from intellect. والفلاسفة أجهل منكم بالشرع والعقل في الإلهيات. He said, and the philosophers are more ignorant than you concerning the Sharia, concerning legislation, and concerning intellect in relation to the affairs of the ilahiyat, yani the belief in God. لكن لما ظنوا أن ما جئتم به هو الشرع وقد رأوه يخالف العقل صاروا أبعد عن الشرع وَالْعَقْلِ مِنْكُمْ. He said that when they saw, though, or when they presumed that which you have brought is considered Sharia, then when they noticed that it opposes, yani what your arguments oppose intellect, then that made them more distant from the Sharia, and it made them more distant from intellect than you. He said, وَلَكِنْ عَارَضُوكُمْ بِأَدِلَّةٍ عَقْلِيَّةٍ بَلْ وَشَرْعِيَّةٍ ظَهَرَ بِهَا عَجْزُكُمْ فِي هَذَا الْبَابِ. He said, rather, they opposed you with adilla, with evidences that are intellectual. In fact, there are Sharia evidences, that even they have come with evidences that are more congruent with the Sharia. They have opposed you with intellectual arguments and with actual Sharia arguments. ظَهَرَ بِهَا عَجْزُكُمْ, which makes clear your weakness in this regard. في بيان حقيقة الصواب, your weakness in explaining the true reality, in explaining truth. And so, you haven't aided Islam, neither have you opposed and overpowered the enemy. In fact, you've made the deen seem irrational, and seem in opposition to aql, and seem in opposition to that which is correct, to those who you're trying to convince, because you've used their methods in a way and in a manner that opposes what is correct. This is important to understand, and we're going to look in the next session, bi'idhnillah, at some detailed debates of Muhammad Hijab, that we may understand, number one, his usage of these bid'i terms, and number two, how he's opposed the da'wah of the prophets and the messengers in that regard. Nasallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala wa fiqna wa iyyakum lima